Hello everybody, my name is Brittany, welcome to my channel, thank you so much for stopping by. Today I have another speed build for you in my Grassland Grove Zoo. If you've been keeping up to date with my Grassland Grove Zoo playthrough here on YouTube, you may notice that it looks a little bit different than the last time we left off. The reason for that is that I've got a new computer, and all of the screen captures that I took of all of the other habitats around the zoo were on that computer. So they've now been lost, but the good news is that I have a brand new computer and the quality is a million times better than my old computer was. So all of my videos from here on out should be really awesome quality. You'll know from the title that today's video is all about Zoo-Provements, or little zoo improvements that I've been putting off. And so now this is going to be kind of a series within a series where I just go through all of the little improvements that I want to do to make this zoo even better. When you're going along and building your zoo, it's very easy to just want to get things done and get the animal in there, or you've spent a massive amount of time on a habitat and you can't bear to look at it anymore, or you just really hate doing buildings for all of the staff zones. That is the pickle that I was in, and so I just sat down one weekend and fixed everything that I've been wanting and needing really to fix. So what I'm starting with here is actually the ostrich habitat, which is one of the habitats that you will be missing the original speed build for. But it's okay because I basically tear the entire thing apart now anyway. I really didn't like the original version, and I think this one is way nicer. The original one used a lot of breeze block, which looks really cool in modern builds, but it doesn't translate as well. It looks kind of dead amongst all of the other buildings. So this one does still use a little bit of breeze block and homage to the original building, but I used a lot of wood and glass in this one as well, and I think that it looks a lot more visually appealing than the original. The original building also had a slanted ceiling, which I didn't hate, but since the time that I originally built it, I've added a lot of domes and curves to the zoo, and so I wanted to kind of replicate that here a little bit as well. So I made the ceiling flat, but I added in some curved ceiling parts to it as well. So my last video that I posted before this one for Grassland Grove Zoo was for the flamingo habitat. And at the time I mentioned that it was the first habitat of 3 for this section called Bird Zone, which, as the name suggests, is specifically for the birds. So it consists of the flamingos, obviously, the ostriches, which we can see here, but then also the peacock habitat, which is the small dome that you'll see in the background. I'm honestly really happy with how the peacock and flamingo habitats turned out. So out of this section of the zoo, the only one that I'm going to be touching is the ostrich habitat. It's a bit of a shame that you'll miss out on the habitat build for the peacock enclosure, because it kind of set the tone for the rest of the zoo in terms of the style that I'm going for. And the interior is really quite cool. It's a food court section for the guests, and the peacocks run around freely. They also have an exterior section which the guests can also walk through. I'll do another video at a later date where I tour the zoo and go through and show you everything in it. But until then, you'll just have to take my word for the fact that it's really cool and look at the outside. I really like the way that I did the education board in the ostrich habitat, and that kind of gets repeated throughout the rest of the zoo. I do it in a few different ways. It isn't just with that like plaster block. Sometimes I use rocks, sometimes I use wood, but honestly, most of the time it looks a lot better than just placing it on the wall randomly. Something else that I really wanted to improve upon in all of these little Zoo-Provements that I'm making is my foliage placement. I don't think that the way that I did it previously was very realistic. I kind of just put things wherever I thought they looked great, and it didn't end up looking very natural at all. So the way that foliage normally grows is that you have the big tree, then you'll have a few plants below that, and then underneath that you'll have like the ground cover. So this time round, I'm trying to, I guess, follow that sequence. The other thing is that you kind of want to group things in either 3s or 7s. Apparently that looks the most visually appealing. So that's what I mostly tried to do on the rock face. On the rock face, it looks a little bit like desert landscaping, which I guess isn't too far off a grassland biome, but I think that it contrasts quite nicely with how I've done the foliage for the rest of the zoo going forward. The other part of the ostrich habitat that I was really not happy with were the mounds. When I originally created them, I wanted them to be like miniature versions of the mounds that you see in the landscapes surrounding the zoo. That's really not what they turned out like at all. So I did some terraforming to make them match a little bit better, and of course built some way for the ostriches to get up onto the mound and around onto the other mounds. And by that I mean a bridge. Not the bridge that you see me building now. This one took a really long time, and I end up replacing it entirely. Originally I wanted it to kind of match the guest building, but once I'd finished building it, I just felt like it didn't really match its surroundings. So I ended up replacing it with a bridge that I stole from another habitat. Actually, it was the flamingo habitat. I guess the reason that it took me so long to finish building this bridge was because I really just kept adding things to it to make it look less bland. When I first put down the grey plasterboards, it looked very one-dimensional. So I added in some wooden columns to bring in some depth and make it look like the ostriches had something to grip onto as they walked across. And that still didn't look realistic enough to me, so I added in some fences along the edge, but it just still looked a little bit stupid. So by this point, I'd finished building the bridges. I didn't really like them, but I'd spent so much time on them that I was just gonna suck it up. And then I spent even more time trying to make it so that the ostriches could actually use the ramps. At this point, I'm so frustrated with how bad I think that it looks and how much time I took to build it, and so I just move on to something else. But I do go back later and change those bridges. Okay, so this next project was kind of a massive undertaking, and it is part of the zoo that will hopefully look a little bit familiar. It's the guest viewing platform of the piggies exhibit. And by piggies, I mean the common warthog and the collared peccary. I really hated the rock ceiling. I still do. I don't know if I hate the look of it visually, but I definitely hate it for this zoo, and I guess the theme and design that I'm going for, which is very modern, lots of glass, lots of wood tones, and then materials like concrete and breeze block to add as accents. I don't think that it was the natural look of the rock that I didn't like. I just think that maybe the rock was the wrong color and it looked a little bit like mud. And I do really like the idea of adding in mud huts, but that's definitely going to be something more of like a African zoo. I definitely wanted to keep the wooden columns that I'd used in the initial design because I quite liked that part of it. I just really didn't like how many columns there were. I think that it blocked off a lot of the view of the habitat, and I was getting a lot of complaints from guests. So to give them a better view, I wanted to open it up a little bit more. This was also the first habitat that I decided I really wanted to start including educators. So I wanted to have a place for them to be able to do their animal talks. The animal talks usually attract a lot of guests, and I didn't want them overcrowding the good viewing points. So opening the viewing area up a little bit more will hopefully also fix that problem. It was also in this habitat where I decided that I wanted to incorporate some of the darker wood tones as well, kind of as an accent. When looking at the aerial view of the zoo, it was just looking a little bit flat, a little bit dead, a little bit too deserty. So two things that I'm doing through all of these Zoo-Provements is add in some darker wood tones and add in as much foliage as possible. And that is going to help break up, I guess, the dry color and give it some more color variation. Something that I really liked about the original design of this viewing area was the shape of it. I really like the curved platform. I did recognize at the time that this was going to pose a little bit of a challenge for me. I definitely remember how long it took me the first time to do wooden columns and rocks around the first version of this guest viewing space, and even with a really powerful PC, it still took a little bit of time. I am way happier with the end result though. I also way prefer how I've done that little garden area out the front. The original design was really closed off, and I really didn't like the actual landscaping inside of the little garden area. It was just really unrealistic. So I quite like the deserty dry vibe that I've got going on here instead. I did still want to pay homage a little bit to the original viewing gallery and all of the rocks that I used in that one, but I wanted to make it look a little bit cleaner. I used so many rocks in the first version that they'd all kind of blended together a little bit, and it just kind of looked like a mud pile, which is great, but not the vibe that I'm going for in this zoo. I do still really like the original wooden planks that I'd used as walling to the left and right of the viewing gallery to kind of hide off the animal barriers. I think that they blend in really nicely with the rest of the zoo, so I wanted to keep them in this version as well. I did also clean them up a little bit. There were so many groups going on, and I managed to add them all into one group instead, so I think that it looks a little bit cleaner. I did miss out on doing it around the edge of the other habitat, which I think is the llama one. I might go back later and re-add those wooden planks in, but I remember that it took me a really long time the first time, and I don't mind how it looks now. It's a little bit more basic, but so much of the rest of the zoo is kind of over-engineered that I don't think that it's necessary. So as I mentioned while I was working on the ostrich habitat, I really wanted to come up with different ways of putting the animal education boards in place, instead of just always putting them on the wall. So I copied my idea from the ostrich habitat again here, but this time I used rocks. I probably should have used a different rock type because I had to duplicate the one that I used over and over again, which was probably a little bit expensive, but I kind of have the opposite issue with money in this zoo, in that I currently have too much of it. And I'm talking my animals have the best of the best food. I have so many keepers per habitat. I'm really trying to go overboard with all of the decorations I use, but my zoo is doing really well. It's not really a bad problem to have. And at some point I do want to add in some really big animals like lions, and they're really expensive. So at that point, it's probably good to have a good chunk of money in reserves. So now I'm adding on the roof onto the viewing platform, and I always really struggle with roofing in this game. I don't struggle with it so much in The Sims 4, but I really struggle with making it look too flat or the roofing just really not blending in with the surroundings. So in the Zoo-Provements, I'm really trying to work on that. And while I'm still not 100% happy, I am a perfectionist, and I do think that it has improved and it looks a little bit more interesting as well. In the roofing for this building, I wanted to try and use layering a little bit. So you've got the first layer, which is breeze block with the curved edges. Then you've got the second layer, also breeze block, but like one step higher. And then you've got the third layer, which is this like gray plaster that I used. It still had this issue of looking a little bit flat, so I added in some decorations. So I've got a few like glass window panes, which I'm thinking will act as skylights. And then I add in a bunch of the brown columns to give some visual contrast as well. While I'm working on those final little touches, I'll catch you up on some other things that have been going on around the zoo that unfortunately I've lost the footage for. So you may have noticed while I was working on the ostrich habitat that there was a big giant dome shape in the background. And this is what I'm calling Savannah Dome. It took me probably 24 hours to finish off the entire habitat, and it's still not done. There are going to be some improvements that I do in the Zoo-Provements video, so you will get to see inside of it a little bit as well. But it's basically this massive dome that houses all of these different African safari animals that all work in a habitat well together. So at this point in the game, I have the giraffe, the rhino, specifically the southern white rhino, zebras, springbok, the Thompson gazelle, and the sable antelope. In a later video, I am going to separate the sable antelope, Thompson gazelle, and springbok because they were just getting too stressed out. They're quite shy animals, and it's a very loud viewing gallery. I did try to add in some security and some signs, but it still didn't work out. And I figured, hey, this would mean that there's more space for the other animals. Okay, back to this habitat. I'm now just adding in some foliage. This again breaks up the grey and adds some additional visual contrast. And I just think that it would also be really cool as a guest to see like these vines hanging from the ceiling. They're also the right biome, so neither of the animals are going to get upset about having them there. You'll see that I added in some lights as well. This is less because I want there to be actual light in this area, and more because I just think it adds an element of realism to it. I don't think that I'll ever extend the hours of this zoo to be open at night, but I'm not opposed to one day maybe building a night zoo. I think that that would be really cool. Only having animals that are awake at night, nocturnal. That's the word I'm looking for. At this point, I'm just making some minor changes to the llama viewing area. I'm duplicating the same habitat boards from the piggies area to where you can have one of the views of the llamas. This is the uphill one. There is also the downhill one. I know that I just built it, but I'll also be making some adjustments to this one as well. Some of those rocks were poking out as well, so I fixed those and pushed them back into the habitat. And then I just duplicated those lights from the front section to the back as well, and added in a little bit of security. As I promised, the ostrich bridge. So as you can see, I deleted the bridges that I spent oh so much time on, and I replaced them with these rock bridges that I built for the previous habitat. That's all that I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!